So if you want to know how to paint an entire army of the brand new Leagues of Votann in just one day, then that's exactly what I'm going to be showing you in this video. I've painted a lot of armies for the channel, and I'm going to be taking you through my step-by-step methodical approach of getting your models on the tabletop as fast as you possibly can. So what I've got here is 2 army sets of the brand new Leagues of Votann, which have been kindly given to us by Gamesworkshop. So I've got 2 sets of this. Now in the box, this is kind of what we get, as you can roughly see. You get 20 of the basic guys, you get a couple of characters, and then you also get 3 bikes. So I've got 2 sets of that, and then what I've also got is some extra little add-ons I've supplemented in because those models aren't quite out yet, and I really wanted to fill out 1500 points. So what I've got is 4 guys over here, which are the Ogryns from the Necromunda set. They're going to be my exosuits, and then I've got 2 other boxes here of Necromunda guys that are going to be my Berzerkers. I felt they looked cool, they got their muscles out, and they kind of fit the aesthetic of the army. And then I've added in a couple of other Necromunda and also AOS models to then fit in some of the other HQ slots. So this is the army that I'm going to be painting, and I'm going to be taking you through the entire process. But in order to get us to this stage where everything's primed black, what I did just to begin with is obviously built and cleaned all the models, scraped all the mold lines off, and then what I did was based the entire army. So I used a little bit of sand, got that down onto the models, let that dry, then I decided to paint everything black with a primer, okay, just straight out the rattle can, primed everything black. Now I have done my test model, I'm really happy with this. I learned lots of mistakes while doing this model, and I would definitely recommend getting one model done first, maybe one evening, take some time, go through all the processes, just to make sure that you're really happy with the end result. And that's exactly what I did. I then write down my process, and now we're into making this happen. So the challenge is, can I paint this in a day? I think I can, but let's find out. Okay, so our first stage, we need to get all the white armor down. That is our first stage of this. And to begin to paint white, what I'm going to be doing is using the airbrush. I've got the Infinity here from Harder and Steenbeck, and I'm going to be using neutral grey. Okay, you could use standard Mechanicus grey from Games Workshop. This is a monument paint. Really like the mixability of this through the airbrush. Doesn't take as much thinning down, which is what I like about it. It's already got a ball inside, which is cool. So we're going to start off with, we're going to be using quite a lot of this. So we're going to be using quite a lot of thinner into the airbrush there. And then we're going to put some grey in. Now we can be a little bit liberal, so about a kind of 50-50 mix there. Swirl that around. So we've got a nice consistency of grey. I don't like to put too much through the airbrush in terms of one go, because it does start to slosh everywhere. So then once I've got my grey, we're going to plug the airbrush in to the compressor, and then this is kind of what we're looking for in terms of a consistency. So you can always hold the end, excuse me, and then we're going to start off with a little bit of grey there, so it should come through. Yeah, nice. Okay, cool. So that's what we're looking for. Now what I've got set up already is the Citadel Color. Now this is used for priming, but actually works great for airbrushing. So obviously this is kind of where we need the model to get to. So we're going to start off with all the white first. So I want a good coverage on all the models, so I'm going to be pretty much going over the entire model here. And it's probably going to take a couple of coats for the grey to get down. Now we've done the top, we're going to go from the edges. Now I want, like we said, good coverage all the way around. What I'm not doing though is going completely from the bottom, so I still want some of the depth from the black, but the grey does need to cover most of the model. So we're looking to cover probably 95%, I would say, of the model. So we've got a little bit of depth left, but not too much. And then we're going to repeat this step for the back of the armour, and then we're going to repeat this for all of the other models. Okay, so now I've done that darker grey on every single model, even the skin tones on some of the Berzerkers and things. I've decided to leave the characters black for now because I'm going to paint those in a slightly different colour because I want them to be in the kind of reverse, but I have just done the bases grey off of the stone. Now for the bikes, we've actually decided to do them white. We thought that would look awesome, so we're going to do them white, and we're going to keep that. So I'm going to show you the next stage that I'm going to do over all the models. Okay, so we've obviously put the thinner into the airbrush, and now we're going to use a slightly brighter grey here. This is bright neutral grey we're going to use. I prefer colder tones to greys than warmer, but obviously choose your palette as you wish really. It doesn't really matter which way you go. I prefer colder because I'm going to be doing with a colder blue, whereas if you went maybe more Sons of Horus green for the cloaks and fabric, then you might go for slightly warmer styles of greys and bone colours for the armour. So anyway, nice and thin there. Again, we're just going to test that out to make sure I've got the right level, and there we go, that's coming through nicely. And again, we're not getting too much build up, so that's really nice there for a nice coverage. Okay, so now what I'm going to start to do is I don't want to cover everything. I'm just looking to cover maybe sort of 70% of the model. Coming from the top, just leaving the recesses slightly darker and putting more colours onto the sort of brighter areas of the model where the light would hit. Now this is going to take a few coats to get this right, and I'm going to go over all the cloaks as well and all the cloth, because then the contrast paint will really pop over all of that. As you can see, it's starting to build up now nicely. Again, over all the fabric. And this is going to be pretty much most of the colour of the model. The nice thing about using the airbrush is that you can keep going over it and building up the colour in really smooth, whereas sometimes when you try and paint white or light greys, it can be very chalky and very difficult to get a smooth finish. So there we have it, look, that's that kind of bike pretty much done. Now I just need to get all the others to that stage before we end up on the final coat of the white. Okay, so after we've done all of that kind of mid-tone grey, we're now going to move on to the very lightest part of the armour, but I don't want to go full white yet. So what I'm actually going to be doing is the colour white grey, so you could mix some GW paints together, and what I'll do is I'll put a list of all the paints I've used and then also Games Workshop paints you could use as well. But this is Model Colour by Vallejo, and this is a white grey. This just saves me from basically having to mix colours together. So we're going to start off with a bit of thinner. Now this is much thicker than the other paints I've been using, so I'm not going to need as much of that, and then in order to keep that nice, really sort of milky consistency that we want. Now again here, we just want to be picking out those sort of top edges now, so we're not really going to be doing a huge amount, and that's kind of mid-tone was our longest step. This should be quite a short step, to be honest. So we're just going to get the consistency right of the paint, make sure I'm happy with that. Now, just for your reference, I'm still using the 0.4 needle through the airbrush. I think that's quite a good one for army painting, and I'm not really doing much fine detail work. So now we're just picking out those sort of edges of the armour now. So we're just building up those top areas of like the shoulder pads, top of the backpack, mainly where that light's going to be catching. Straight down the middle of the torso, on the hands, on the leg panels. Turn it round, make sure we cover all parts of the model. And also then we're going to be basically highlighting the cloak or the material. And this is going to be the base colour for the contrast paint. Okay, and then once you have done that, you should end up with a model where on the top should be nice and white, nice and cold, and as you turn it over, much kind of darker shadows of grey there. And then again, we'll be putting a lot more sort of contrast paints on all those cloth areas, so you can be a little bit more liberal with the white on the cloth, because we're going to be covering that with contrast paint later on. And now's the time to basically correct any mistakes that you've missed, that maybe you didn't do enough grey on. Yeah, there we have it. Right, next step. So now we've done this, we've done all the white. Now I had to give this a second coat, which was a bit annoying, but we've pretty much done that now. So second coat is on, and much happier with that white, but we really want to pick out those edge highlights now, okay? So what I've got here is I've got my dry brush, okay, and this has got nice bristles. You can use a makeup brush, whatever you want really, and then I'm going for the whitest of whites I can possibly find. This is Momentum's Bold Titanium white, sorry, and we're just going to put this on a little bit of cardboard, okay, and then we just want to work this into the bristles, get a nice coverage, and then we just kind of want to actually work most of it off. I'm pushing down quite hard, getting most of the residue off outside of the bristles, and then what we're looking for is when you go over your skin, it's actually a really good idea to do this. I find that we just want to pick out like the top part, so you shouldn't be able to go into the crevices. I don't know if you can see that very well because of the light, but that's what we're looking for. And then we're just going to go all the way over, really picking out those kind of edges, and we kind of want to work them against the edges of the model, and that's going to pick out all the edge highlights basically in a really simple way. So there we go, working against where we think the ridges are, and then all the armor, and then when we put the contrast paint on, that's going to really pop then, and we're going to get some nice clean lines. So again, nice and quick with this job. Don't need to do this too much. We don't want to apply too much white because we've kind of already done that. And then when we put the next step on, which will be the satin varnish over all the white, then it's going to tie it all in together. And then that's going to be the next stage after this. So again, on the cloaklet, brings out a little bit of texture as well, which is quite nice. A little bit of stippling on there, on the cloth area, because then that will give it texture when we actually come to the contrast paints. And dry brushing is a great way if you don't want to do like line edge highlighting to bring out some of these kind of details. And there we have it, see, much brighter now. And then when I've done the base, we're going to really start to see this pop. So yeah, now it's time to get dry brushing on all the white armored models. I don't need to do the guys with the skin tones, they're kind of already done, and they'll go straight onto that next contrast step. So it's going to be all the white, that's coming up next. Right now, the dry brushing stage is done. Now it's time, we're going to do the bases now. And the reason why we're going to do that is because we can be a little bit messy around the boots. We're going to use the airbrush, can be super fast. And what we're going to do is just take a brown, then into a lighter brown, then into a lighter one again. So I've got one called Gobi Brown here. Then I'm going to use Zandri Just from Games Workshop. And then I've got one called Thar Brown from Citadel Color. So you just need a kind of your normal basing mix. That's kind of a similar style to what we do here at VT. And now I'm going to show you the process that we go through. So I've put some thinner in. We're going to put the Gobi Brown in first of all. Lovely little noise there. And then we're going to mix this together. Okay, so I've got one of the bases here, and we're just going to apply the brown quite liberally all over the model. And actually, as you can see, it's got quite a nice tone because of the whites anyway. It's kind of done a lot of the work for us already. And we're just going to do that another quick coat. So I'm going to show you the next stage. So now you've applied the brown. Then what we're going to be doing is adding the next color. So this is that Zandri Dust. So this is a airbrush paint from Games Workshop. So I'll be able to apply this straight into the airbrush with a little bit of water. Swish it about. There we go. And with this, I'm actually going to tilt the model slightly. And then what I'm going to do is just apply it now to those kind of edges. So it's not going to catch the deeper parts, just the lighter areas. Once you've done that, you're going to take your last remaining color. So this is called Thar Brown, but again, just a pallid witch flesh mixed with a bit of or Terminata Stone from GW would be absolutely fine as well. Just a nice kind of lighter color than that Zandri just now. I'm going to do one final quick blast with the airbrush. Make sure the consistency is right. And now we're just going to literally turn it horizontally. And that's just going to pick out those top areas. and give us a nice texture. There we go, look. And then we have our base. So now what I'm going to do is do that entire process for all of the models, starting with the darker brown, then the Xandri Dust, and then the lighter one. So that's going to be coming up next. Okay, so now all the bases are done. The next stage is for the contrast paint. Now I'm going to basically apply the contrast paint all over the material, okay, of the model, and obviously look at the box art to give you a bit of an idea. So yeah, we're going to be using a contrast paint here. I really liked the color Croxagore scales. That's what I've gone for. And yeah, we're just going to be applying this straight out of the pot. You can mix it with a little bit of water as well if you want, just to kind of see what the consistency is going to be like. And we're again putting that straight over all of those areas. Now, because we did the nice Xenophil highlights earlier, this contrast paint's gonna really pop on those sort of edges where we want to, where that sort of material is going to be a little bit lighter, and that's going to start to look absolutely fantastic as we go forward with this project. Applying it quite liberally all over. Obviously not getting it on any of the white or on the boots either. Now if you do go on the boots, doesn't matter too much, and this is kind of why we did the basing step before this step, because we're going to do the boots black, and black will go over this contrast paint really, really well, taking care to ignore the gun holster because that's going to be a leather brown, and obviously I don't want to cover that. So yeah, being really careful as we go around the white area, because there's a white leg panel there. We just want to make sure we go around there. On the kneecaps, again, that's going to be black, so we can, if we nudge on that part, it doesn't matter too much, but then that's kind of really as clean and tight as we need to get this. Don't be too concerned if you accidentally get a little bit on some of the gun elements, because again, they're going to be black, and also don't be too worried if you get on the base, because we can go back to the base later on and do some kind of cover up work with basing material. You could always put some rendering powders on there or some tufts, and that's a really good way to sort of mask any mistakes. But at this stage, getting in between the legs is probably the hardest element without getting it on the white part. So once you've done that, you should end up with quite a nice color to the cloth, as you can see. And then we're just going to go in and then do the sleeves as well. Okay, now when you've done that step, I have made a couple of mistakes here where I have nudged onto the white ever so slightly on the arm there, but that's okay because we can always go around with a little bit of white later on and just tidy that up, because that's on the edge highlight anyway. But apart from that, the cloth is now done. So once that's now finished for both the legs and also the sleeves, now I need to do that for all the other models. So this is going to be quite a time-consuming step, and the one I am least looking forward to. So yeah, let's get that done now, and let's break the back of this. Right, now we've done the blue, and now it's time for the brown, okay? Now, I've chosen to go with Cygor brown rather than snakebite leather. It's a contrast paint, and the reason why I've chosen to do that is I feel like it's got a less gloss finish. It's a little bit more like a Rhinox hide, and then you can just layer on a little bit of lighter brown as well, just to pick out any details if you wanted. So now we've got to do all of the belts and the leather material. And the reason why I've decided to do the entire belt with brown, just for speed really, is so that it creates less difficulty than with like if I was to do it black or something later on. So what we're going to do with the contrast paint, we're going to just dabble a little bit on here onto obviously our palette, water it down just a smidge, and then what we're going to start to is just pick out all of the details. Obviously we've got the little leather satchels. If you find it's gone a little bit watery like here, just, you know, take off most of the liquid and then just place the brush on it, and it will start to soak up a lot of those contrast paint again. And obviously because we've done all the dry brushing and stuff, it actually when it dries is going to give you a really nice finish. We're only going to you know, pick out most of the sort of recess areas with this, and then obviously the lighter areas, which would naturally be a highlight, are already, because it's so much lighter because of that dry brush technique that we used earlier, You know, some of those edges are already going to be nice and lighter, which is great. So we're just going to work our way around nice and neatly, try not to get it onto any of the blue. Whilst I was doing this as well, I did notice that actually I'd missed a couple of spots of the blue as well. So I had gone round and just sort of kept the blue open as well. And what I then did is obviously just filled in any gaps I'd missed as I went. And that's a really good way just to check your models as you go from the previous step. You can just make sure you've done everything correctly. Now, definitely going to recommend one of these, by the way. The amount of times I've spilt contrast paint is ridiculous, and this is one of the little holders from Games Workshop, and I've spilt many a contrast paints on the carpet before, so I felt, you know, I would invest in that, and it was well worth it. So yeah, definitely use that. That's a staple now in my arsenal, or my toolbox, as it were, for hobbying. So yeah, now we're just going to keep going around. Again, we've got to pick out all those other leather details as well, so sometimes you'll find them on the gun strips here, or like the leather straps holding the guns, and in particular the bikes have got a lot more leather details on them as well. And it's again pointing out which ones you want to be a little bit darker, maybe a little bit lighter, and using different techniques or brown colors just to pick out the different types of leather materials that you might have on those models. But for now, this is what we're going to do, and this is quite a long process, so it's a bit of a grind, but you just have to get it done. And then after that, we're going to move on to painting all the flesh. So once you've done the brown, then the next stage is to do the flesh. And I've done a really quick technique here of actually cutting out the sprues for the faces, and I primed them black, and then I've done a zenithal highlight, which basically means prime the entire model black, and then with the other rattle can of white, I've just gone from basically above, and it's created this light effect. So when we start to apply the flesh color that we've gone for, Fire Stayer Flesh, then we can water the mix down ever so slightly. We don't want it straight out the pot, as I do find it's a little bit too dark. And then we're literally going to paint all the faces super quickly, which is great. I have done a full video on exactly how I'm going to paint these, so you can check that out. We'll put the link above and also in the descriptions for you if you wanted a bit of a longer video on how to actually paint all these with the beards in the different colors and everything. There's a bit more of a thorough job. But yeah, we're going to now do this for all of the flesh, and then I also need to do my Necromunda guys, because a lot of them have a lot of their skin tones out, so I need to do that for all of those guys as well. So I'll quickly show you what they'll look like once we've applied the layer. As you can see here, I did this one earlier, applied all the flesh over it, and then I started to go over some highlights. So as I showed you, this model here has already got some of its base coats down, and then we need to put some highlights on it, and I'll show you in the next section of the video. Right, so once you've done your contrast and you've completely covered all of the heads, now what we need to do is go in and pick out all of those details, the highlights. So we're going to kick off, if you see my palette, I've got a mixture of colours here. I've loaded it up, I've got my mid-tone here, as you can see is lighter than the contrast paint. I've then got a even lighter colour there with a bit of a white, and I can kind of use these threes to mix together. Then I've got a grey, a lighter grey and a very light grey for some hair and beards. I've then got blonde with a lighter blonde I can mix together. I've got orange for ginger beard, and then I've also got brown and a dark brown for some hair and beards as well. So again, this is kind of what we're going to be looking for. I've got a very small brush here. This is the Monument #1 series I'm going to be using. And we're going to kick off first of all with just a bit of that mid-tone, nice and watered down. If you are worried it's too dissimilar to this, you can always mix a little bit of this together, okay, just to make sure you've got a nice tone. And again, look, you can change the tone a little bit on each of the models, so you've got some maybe slightly darker skin than others. That's completely fine. So again, we're just going to now start picking out those kind of raised areas, and we're looking for the kind of T-zone over on the nose, just on the cheeks there. So it's not a huge amount, and also the mouth as well with this sort of reddier skin tone. And obviously towards the back of the head, it's going to start going into the rest of the armour of the model. So you don't need to worry too much about the backs, just make sure the tops of the ears are done. Right, so now we've done that, we need to go in with the next coat. Okay, so we're looking for an even lighter one now. And again, if you're worried it hasn't dried, get out your hairdryer, give it a quick blast. Okay, so now what we're going to do is get that lighter colour again, water it down slightly on the palette. I'm going to again just go over in even smaller areas what we've just done. So now we're just looking for the nose, the eyebrows, the cheeks, bottom of the lip there. Just bring out some of those sort of details that we can see. Now you could actually probably miss this stage, to be honest, if you really wanted to. I think the faces kind of look good enough, but this just brings that sort of next level to the model. So now it's time to fill in some of the details. And this is where we can be super quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this sort of darker brown, and we're going to basically have this guy have some golden hair. This one looks like he's got a bit of a ginger moustache, I reckon, so that's what he's going to have here. So we're going to go in with a dark ginger first, or dark orange colour. It doesn't really matter too much what colours you use. I think people really overthink it. We can keep this really simple. And there we have it. So now we've got a good mix there, I think. That looks pretty good, just straight from the off. And then we could put those straight on. But again, a quick either wash or highlight of the same colour is just going to really make these sort of hair pop a lot more. And again, just mixing white with the main colour that you use is another quick way of just adding a very fast kind of highlight colour to what you've already done. Dry brushing on the stippled one, that's going to work quite well here. Dry brushing is a great technique when you're working with like natural materials like hair, scales, cloth, those types of things. And there we have it. Faces are painted, that's 6 done in quite a short time period, and you obviously just keep repeating that process. And then the last thing all you would need to do is add a little bit of contrast black around the bottom part here, which you know is good, or match it to the same colour as the armour, and then that way you know that you've completely finished that, and then they'll be ready to, you know, literally twist off here and then stick into the model, and they're going to look awesome. Okay, so now the faces have been painted. One thing I did though was I used a matte varnish, and the matte varnish I use is from Colourforge. I found it to be a really fantastic matte varnish, and the matte varnish basically takes out any of the sort of shininess that sometimes contrast paint can create. So if we look now, as you can see, basically there's no shininess whatsoever on any of the skin tones, which is awesome. And again, that matte varnish just applied over here means that then it doesn't apply to any of the model if you didn't want it on there. So it's a great step to do that at this stage, which is why I do recommend keeping the skin tones separate. So now we've done that, we're going to move on to going back to our miniatures, and obviously they're currently still headless, but we need to do the black now. So what we're looking to do is pick out the guns, the fingers from the gloves. We're looking to do any of these kind of little metal carabiner clips, pipes will do black as well. Probably the inside of the sort of material in here will do black. The gun holster, the gun handle, sorry, will be black. And then some little pipes as well will do black as well. So that basically means that from then on, we're pretty much down with majority of the colors, and then it's just going to leave a little bit left of weathering to do. Oh, and finally, one other thing I should mention, we're going to do the boots black and also these little knee caps black as well, okay? So that's kind of the next stages, and I'm just going to be using contrast, and I'm going to be using the contrast black, which is called Black Legion Black. I think for me, this is the best contrast black I've found, and again, one that we're going to be using throughout all of these miniatures. So again, just water it down ever so slightly. I'm using the toon brush here from Monument, and we're just going to start slapping this on. Yep. The other good thing here about, if you're thinking of using any silver or metallics at this stage as well, I would probably put that in black to be over that entire area, and then later on we can go over that with a metallic. It just means if you miss any areas, then you've got black underneath rather than any white, so it just looks like the metallic is shadows, or there's shadows on it rather than like white hot spots, which obviously can detract from the miniature. And then you might want to pick out some of the details. Like I said, if we're looking at metallics, like maybe the belt buckle, we know that's going to be potentially metallic. So we can just kind of do that black now in this step, just around the kind of leather elements there. And again, making sure that we try not to get this on any of the blue, any other areas that we've done. And as you can see here, we've got a bit of a white hotspot that we've created from the leather. And if we just water down the black, and then you can just kind of put a bit of a thin line down here between that kind of black and the brown, or the white and the brown, and we can just kind of do it like a bit of a outline. And again, that will just make that nice and clear there for us. Again, putting in the fingers, and we can be quite aggressive with this, because if we spill it anywhere, providing it spills onto the gun casing, we're fine. We just don't want it going onto the white. And then we will be highlighting the gun with some greys, just to pick out any other sort of finer details. So it does look all quite blocky at the moment, but when the contrast paint's done its thing, obviously some of the edges will be highlighted anyway, giving us a nice clear outline of where we need to go in with some lighter colours to potentially edge highlight. But remember, we are doing a battle-readied army here, so we're not doing all the details. We're just doing what we can to make this kind of table ready. And then you'll also see some like little lines in pipes on the model, just kind of on the trousers here and down the sort of shins. Again, that's entirely up to you. If you feel like you've got the skills to be able to do that and just sort of use the brush to go down, you can certainly do that with the black as well. If you don't, then I would just leave it. It's probably not going to be too, different or look too odd if you just left it blue. And that's kind of where we're at with this at the moment. So yeah, all starting to come together now. So now it's time to do the big 40. Here we go. So once you've done all of the black, and I'm not gonna lie, that was painful. That was probably the most painful step of the entire process. And I regret now not painting all the elbow pads and knee pads just blue. I think that would have been much, much simpler. And also the belt, probably would have just done it black in hindsight. Anyway, it is what it is. The army's looking pretty good at this moment, and one thing that I did last night after we stopped recording, it took me a couple of hours, but basically what I've now done is I've painted all the cloaks, okay, on the bikers. I needed to freshen up my environment, sit in a slightly comfier chair to get this done, and basically what I've done is a series here of basically tan colour. So I started off with Steel Legion drab, then I went, after a couple of coats, I worked up to a Xandri dust, and then a sort of brighter ivory colour from Monument. And yeah, I'm really happy with how the cloaks have turned out. So that's kind of where they're at. And then what I started to do is just practice my weathering technique, okay? So this is, again, where we're at with kind of like the finished bike. Really happy with that. Stuck a couple of heads in, started to work on what some of the silvers might look like as well for the bike. So this is kind of my test model, and I just need to do these little lights at the front. So the next stage is this chipping and weathering, because this really makes the model pop. So if we compare one to the other, as you can see, it just kind of really finishes off the bikes, I think. Once obviously we've added the blacks in and a little bit of silver left to go on the bikes as well. So that's what we're going to do next, and really simply, this is a very quick tip, I would say. You need to get one of these kind of like sponges. Now the more raggedy the sponge, the better, because we don't want the more sort of random elements. It's going to really create a nice rustic natural feel. So I've got mahogany here. You could use a rhinox hide. And again, we're just going to stipple this, okay? So as you can see, I'm just trying to create basically a bit on the sponge, and then we want to actually sponge it off until we get kind of like a cool, different, I suppose, effect, all right? And then we don't want too much on the actual sponge itself. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of chuck this on wherever we think the, I suppose, damage would occur on the bike. And again, we're kind of like around the edges, on maybe on the front of the light. And you want to do this like as random as you possibly can. So again, just a bit of chip damage here on the edges, maybe like a bullet ricochets off. And again, these are going to just really make the model kind of stand out. And as you can see, it's already making quite a nice effect there on the model. Now we still need to add a little bit of black on this one in the silvers. Obviously we can show you the silver step later on, but that's really going to help make this model pop. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at now with the weathering. Now the next thing, if you really wanted to take this a little bit further, if you had any sort of like nice large areas of sort of rust or chip damage, like maybe here, then what you can actually get is a pure white. And that pure white is going to go at the bottom edges of where the rust hits. Now what that's going to do is give you like a 3D effect of the chipping. So as you can see on this one, I just applied a little bit of white here and kind of painted around the sort of bottom part in like a bit of an L shape. And then again down the bottom of here as well, just to sort of, that just helps it pop ever so slightly. Okay, a little bit more, little bit kind of depth there to the rust. So again, that would be like another step which you might not want to include if you're trying to paint this quickly. But again, what I want to do with this entire army is get it to a certain standard that I'm happy to put it on the table, but then I know I can go back to it another stage, add some edge highlights, maybe some transfers, you know, add a little bit more depth to that weathering, pick out a few more details, and then take it to that next level. So I'm not ruining anything at this stage. This is kind of nice base levels, but then allow myself that capacity to push my painting skills with this army if I wanted to try and go for a Renaissance Man Award or Best Painted or such like. I've still got that room to grow into it, but I haven't done anything at these stages that are going to inhibit my progress later on and prevent me from pushing the army to that next level. So anyway, weathering is going to be coming up next, and that's going to be really helpful in making this army look absolutely awesome. Right, so once you've done all of the weathering, as you can see now, the model's starting to look a lot better, starts to bring out a lot of this armor details, which is really, really nice. Now, the next stage here is for metallics. So what I would say at this stage is if you want to do a matte varnish, make sure you apply that over the entire model before you move on to the metallics, otherwise it's going to really dull down those pigments of the metallic. But I've decided if I am going to do one, it's going to be a satin varnish. And again, it just brings out a lot of the details. I've done a couple of tests. Obviously, I'm still keeping the heads off because they've been matte varnished. They'll be stuck on at the very, very end of everything that we do here. So all we've got left now is the metallics, and then we've got the little lights in the middle here that I want to do with some contrast paint, or potentially even the airbrush, and then I'm going to put some transfers on at a later date. So here we go, we're going to do the metallics. Now, there aren't a huge amount of different metallic details on here that I want to cover. So I've got a dark silver here. This is the Monument Dark Silver, but any of the GW darker silvers or metallics would be fine. And then we're going to just kick off, first of all, with, for example, the blade. We're going to give that a good coverage all the way over, not going in the recesses because I don't mind the black recess between where the blades start to hit. And then we're just going to give that all the way over nice and simply, doing this very, very fast. And then we're going to go over with a lighter silver later on just to pick out some of those details. Now, in terms of the gun, again, you might want to do, for example, the gun barrel silver. So I start off with that darker metallic first. And then potentially there's like this middle section of the gun here. I'm probably going to do that bronze. And then also the little round segment there, I'm probably going to do that bronze, and this part at the back, I'm going to do this potentially silver just to make it look a little bit different to the other metallic parts on the gun. And then obviously we've got the carabiner clip. So again, now would be a great time just to kind of do that silver there. And again, just sort of slowly dragging the brush, the bristles over that is going to pick out some of those details. And having that black undercoat just means that there's going to be no white elements. And then a nice silver buckle there on his leather belt. So again, this is only going to be a few brush strokes here and there, but you do have to be very careful, otherwise you will make a mistake and it will start to cover up some of the other details. Now, There are some other metallic areas on this. You could decide to do the drum on the backpack silver as well. I'm going to decide just to leave this white for now in terms of speed, but it might be something I go back to. And again, you've got these other kind of little details in here. You could do silver as well and sort of bring out some of the other elements of metallic on the model. Even some of the little sort of, I suppose, little binding elements or clips could be silver. Any sort of ends of buckle belts you might want to do silver as well, but again, this is completely up to your discretion as to how many different details you want to do. I'm going to keep it fairly simple. Once that's dried, I'll then go over with this lighter silver as well to edge highlight a little bit of that very quickly. But now I want a little bit of this gold. Again, water it down ever so slightly and just pick out some of those other details as well, just to kind of bring those out and make them pop. And again, you know, you could, if you're careful, you don't need to necessarily do a wash, providing you don't put the bronze. This is a very dark bronze, again, for a monument. If you are good at not putting the paint in the recesses, you can just kind of leave it like that, and that will stand out okay, and you don't need to worry about a wash or anything. And that looks pretty good. So yeah, fairly happy with that one. If we're doing an entire model like this, again, what we can see is I'm just kind of dragging the bristles over it in a line, and then not trying to get into the recesses too much, so it still keeps a bit of that kind of depth from the model. Alternatively, if you did want to push it all in there, you might need to use a wash later on to bring out some of those sort of details and crevices. So there we have it. Next step, the metallics. It's coming up next. Right, so once you've done all the metallics, then what it's time for is doing the lights. Now, a lot of the bikes and also the typical Hearthguard also have these little lights in the middle of their torso, so we need to do all those, and we're going to show you how to do that on this bike here. So you can use contrast paint, but I've decided to use the airbrush at this stage, just because it's super quick and easy. So I've just banged in a bright yellow. And what I'm going to do is basically aim the airbrush to be kind of roughly in the direction of the light. And as you can see, it kind of dissipates a little bit around the area. And I'm just thinking where I'm going to aim it at the light and then pull it away from the model. And then that way it's kind of creating that illusion of a light's being cast. It's got some little lights on the front here as well. Little light there next to it. So again, we're creating these little light forms just to give the model a little bit more Shazam, we're going to go with, and then at the back as well, and that's pretty much what we're going to go for. This guy on his chest, what I quite like about the airbrush, it is quite good at getting in those little gaps. Then what we're going to do is, now we've got that, is just get a little bit of contrast paint, and we're just going to stick that straight in this gap here, okay? And then basically that's just going to give this area a little bit more color to it, a little bit more brightness. But then we've still got that kind of glow effect on the surroundings. So it means we've got like that kind of bright source in the middle there. And that is really quite what kind of pucker. Look at the Shazam. Yeah, that's looking good. Yeah, awesome. Right, great. And then obviously the ones on the back there as well. A little bit of contrast in there. Gives that kind of nice orange glow effect that we want. Right, there we have it. So now it's time to do everybody else. Finally, the last step of this build out. Now we've got the model and we've put all the details on, we've done all the lights and everything else. There's one last thing we need to do, and that is to stick the heads on. So at this stage, if you wanted to varnish the model, now I would suggest you go and do that. But yeah, now we just need to go through all of the different models and add their heads on. Okay, so that's gonna be what we do next. So first of all, what you're gonna do is take your model that you need to obviously put the head on. Good idea is to obviously the guns pointing one way, so we need the head in that direction, and then we're going to take our strips of heads. You're going to twist one off. If you need to clean this bottom part, you know, make sure you do that. This one actually looks like it's pretty flat when I rub my finger across it. Then I've put a little bit of super glue on my palette, and the reason why you want to do that instead of on the model is because if it spills over, it can create like a crystal effect, and it will really ruin the face, and you'll end up like you've got a blizzard going on your face, and it's not a good look. So yeah, we're going to then push that into that gap, and there we have it. He's now looking down his gun. Awesome. So that's what we're going to do for all the models. Coming up next is start putting those heads on. And then I reckon, I'm pretty happy with that actually. As a final piece, pretty good. There's lots of things I would definitely go back and do. Definitely add some transfers on, I think would really, really help. Some of the models do need a little bit of a clean up here and there. Obviously we've done this as fast as we possibly can. You know, there's no edge highlighting on any of these sort of elements at the back of the bike. But I think for a tabletop standard, I'm actually really pleased with this. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing the army completed on the table once we've added all the Berzerkers in and all the other elements that we need to, and all the characters as well. Obviously, we'll do the characters in another video so we can show you how to do those as well, because they're awesome. And the paint scheme's very, very different, which is why I want to keep those separate. But there we have it, and really hope you've enjoyed this video, and check out our other videos on more painting tutorials and also the battle report on seeing how they actually perform, and all of our army reviews that we have for free view. And if you want to become a member, all of our top tips to help you steer around the meta. See you next time.